Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this session on the Architecture Drawing Prize. As you might have noticed, our three category winners this year, the actual drawings, are on the board just behind you, so inspect them at your leisure after this session. I'm just going to say a word of introduction about the prize. Then we'll go through the list of drawings that are going to be exhibited at the Soane Museum in the new year, which provided the shortlist for this year's awards. And then we'll have a discussion about the winners. I'd like to welcome Langlands and Bell artists, who are frequent judges on this award, Ben Langlands and Nikki Bell. And also Jason Parker, architect from Make Architects in London. And the inspiration for this prize actually came from Make's founder, Ken Shuttleworth, who, when he was a student, was known as Ken the Pen because of his facility with a pen to draw at speed almost anything, which continues to this day. And Ken approached us at World Architecture Festival and then the Sir John Soane Museum to see if we could produce a kind of triple partnership which could promote really initially what was assumed to be the dying art of hand drawing. That's where the inspiration came from. But actually, when we looked at it, it would have been perverse if we'd only had a prize for hand drawing, because clearly, today's generations frequently prefer to use digital as their primary, if not exclusive, mode of drawing production. And of course, people who want to work in a hybrid mode. So that explains the three categories we have. The prize is in its fifth year. We kept going through lockdown because actually a drawing prize is one of the few things which is relatively easy to do online. And we will do an online event before next year's Soane Museum exhibition. We have quite a good worldwide audience. We have Arc Daily as a media partner who helped to promote it and publicize it. And I think the award should go on and on and on for one simple reason. Hand drawing is not in peril. And in fact, the proportion of drawings for this award which are submitted, which are hand drawn, has in fact increased. And I think there were twice as many hand drawn entries this year as there were digital and hybrid. I think we got about 140-ish drawings this year. It seems to range between 140 and 150. Pretty global. Quite a lot from students and younger architects, possibly because there's a very discretionary price attached to them for entering. Actually, the proportion of mature architects who entered increased this year a bit. Well, let's have a look at there are the sponsors, and I should say that we're very grateful to the Iris Ceramica Group for their support for the awards this year. So let's have a look at three entries in the digital category. This is Eric Pham from the University of Texas at Arlington. And as you can see, this is heavily based on Minecraft, but it's taken to a kind of super and extreme degree. And we thought it was a kind of fascinating exploration for what parts of a city might be like. Eric described this as a reclamation of childhood, so obviously influenced by youthful years spent with this video game. And he says, this world is a culmination of a decade looking at games as representations of spatial conditions. So you can tell he's gone to architecture school. So that was the first shortlist in the digital category. The next one, very different sort of drawing by Mei Shen Duan from the University of Melbourne. And the title of this, as you can see, is Nema Sign. created and composed using Rhino and Photoshop. This is a democratic art institute led and facilitated by its 3 distinct academies: painting, textile and digital art. It aims to produce, gather and disseminate mementos from a diverse range of individuals whose private memories eventually become public knowledge. And finally in this category, and that was the winner, Anton Marcus Passing, who won our overall award, I think the last year that we were in Amsterdam, I think 2019. He's based in Berlin and has got the wittily named a remote-controlled studio. And he writes about this: the observed splendor of the eternal is the sister of finality. She is able to modify established structures, putting us in a traumatic state. The wall is the beginning and the end at the same moment, a manifested inhalation of the infinite. Now, we usually only read these captions if we like the drawing. And the more we looked at this drawing, I think it's fair to say the more we did like it. So I'm going to ask, who should we begin with? Nikki, would you like to say a word about this?
Well, we thought it was richly complex, and it's vertical and horizontal, and it's not a wall or a barrier. You sort of enter it, you go through it. It's a whole universe. It's a city in the making. You know, it's an urban complex.
The image that he won with back in 2019, I don't think it was more complex, but it was more three-dimensional, wasn't it? It was more, oh, well, this is a kind of exploratory room that you go into. And at first sight, I think it's fair to say we were slightly baffled by this. But then when we started looking at it in more detail, you started to say, okay, yes, it's a kind of mapping exercise, and it's a plan, and the building elements are there, and it starts to kind of leap off the page. Ben, did you have any thoughts about this one?
Yeah, I think the main thing I thought the title, The Wall, was unusual for it, given as Nikki said, it's not a wall or a barrier. It doesn't appear to be. It seems to be a place and a territory, but it has this sort of line running through the middle of it, and it also reminded me of this. Made me think in a very different way of this huge project proposed for Saudi Arabia, the line, 170 kilometer. So I was thinking, in a way, maybe this is a kind of almost a kind of Gandhi-esque ruin of MBS's line in Saudi Arabia.
Well, of course, our digital expert, Narinder, who heads up digital design at Foster & Partners, was very keen on this. But he couldn't be, he's elsewhere in the world at the moment. He couldn't be with us. We tend to defer to Narinder on matters digital, because unless you're an expert in composing these things yourself, it's actually rather difficult sometimes to know whether actually this is a really sophisticated piece of work, or is it a cut and paste job? And the Foster & Partners connection has been with us since year one. And in fact, the people coming out of Make, a lot of them, certainly in the early years, came from Foster's. So there's that connection going on. And I think it's very nice that relationship still exists, Jason.
Yeah, no, there's the continuity is great, particularly with Narinder. And I just think with this particular piece, the temptation with the digital category, I think, is to resort to kind of repetition and geometries. And this one, to me, is the most abstract, kind of painterly. It almost feels like there's been a few accidents. There's bits of blurring. And so it's an interesting, even though it's digital, it feels the most, in a way, the most touched by a human hand.
Thank you very much. Well, I think we're going to move on to the hybrid category now. And the first one here displayed sort of as a winning drawing on a wall in a museum. And I have no idea whether that's actually real or invented. But the drawing itself we found intriguing. This was by William du Toit, Victoria University of Wellington, and it's called the Stamper Battery. And this is based on an E.M. Forster short story from 1909 called The Machine Stops. So his allegorical architectural drawing represents a seminal tale of environmental devastation caused by the 1860 New Zealand gold rush. It combines orthographic notation and layering techniques to preserve an important heritage story of place identity as a lesson for future generations to learn from past mistakes. And the second hybrid, this is from Sean Sear, I think architect. It's called Traversing Dreamscapes. It's an autobiographical investigation into the entanglement of dreams and reality, explored in 5 chapters. So I assume this is the first one. And then the winner of this category was a rather joyful drawing called the Fitzroy Food Institute by Samuel Wen and Michael Wren, University of Melbourne. And this project is about a dumpling institute that deviates from a traditional Orientalist attitude towards Chinese culture, while also examining ideas of globalization and automation. It's a composite drawing, plan, sections, elevations, views, diagrams, detail, and call-outs arranged in a top-down view of a typically Chinese round table dining experience. And Ben, I thought we just found this completely charming.
Yeah, this is a really beautiful drawing. Yeah, I love the way I love the use of the table as a metaphor, the kind of multicultural meeting and meal, and becoming a kind of metaphor for a plan of the city, like a pictorial plan of a Chinese city with a great square or at the center and the hall, and the objects, the crockery on the table becoming like sort of monuments to great social historical figures in the society.
Yeah, I like the sort of multiple viewpoints and the different scales, and I think the use of colour is very subtle as well. It's not brash. There's many tones of colour and different scales, and there's obviously a pink hand and a yellow hand. They're different. It's a multi-dimensional, multicultural experience, a feast of architecture looking down on the city. It's a shared experience, which I think, the theme of this whole WAF this year is about togetherness. So I think there's nothing more exciting than sharing a meal with conviviality and exchange.
I mean, one of the things we always think is, who has the time to do this sort of drawing? The answer is students. And I wonder, Jason, in your office, I mean, would you ever produce a drawing like this as part of a competition pitch? I suspect not. Are there people who would do this sort of thing, as it were, in their spare time?
I think you've obviously got to make the time for it. So we probably have to drag people off their machines and give them that time. But I think if this was a competition drawing, this would be about the journey, that the whole process. This is drawn about process. So you've got a bit of a brief going on in the bottom left, and then around the table are all of the influences. So it feels like this is the drawing that would describe the whole of the process, from concept around the periphery and then kind of coming to the table as a team. And I think it also has a bit of game, it feels like a board game that you're at play, which, so as an architectural sort of representation of the process to get from idea and brief to building, it really captures it. So we'd be really proud of this if we were submitting this.
I think it's got great scale as well and great presence. I mean, if you look at the scale of it on the stand, it's pretty impressive.
Well, I think the other thing is that what we're trying to find in these drawings is something that is explaining or helping to explain some sort of architectural proposition, that it's not simply a drawing of something. I mean, we always get through a few sort of very well executed, measured drawings of buildings, but quite frankly, is that an architectural drawing? Well, yes, it is, because it's a drawing of a building. But is it an architectural drawing? And I think our conclusion actually is almost never is. And there was one exception this year, which was it was like a measured drawing of the front of Buckingham Palace. Actually, it's the back of Buckingham Palace, the view from the Mall. But the guy who'd done it, Francis Terry, who usually sends in, it's always a classical building, but on this occasion, he'd redesigned Buckingham Palace. And of course, as soon as he'd redesigned it, the drawing completely came to life. He put a huge cupola right in the middle of it. And it was really, really good fun, but not quite good fun enough to get shortlisted, and less fun than this winner. Let's move on to the hand-drawn, slightly more numbers on this one. And this first one, by Georgios Christophe, Bartlett School of Architecture, the Temple of Gaia, a triptych. It's a little hard to see on the screen. I'm sorry about that, but it is black and dark and dense. But on examination, we thought there'd been terrific skill. It's 3 A1 sheets depicting the Temple of Gaia, the goddess of earth, in its most prominent states throughout its lifespan: building construction, the praise of nature, and the iconographic state of ruin. Technical drawing pens and watercolor paper were used to create the drawing. Any comments?
It's
Well,
a sort of, yeah, off
You
to
can
you.
sort of see the influence of somebody like Piranesi in this kind of dark world, particularly in the drawing on the left of the construction of the temple, and all the different sort of activities sort of incrementally sort of constructing this temple to the source of life.
I mean, it's quite Piranesian. It's very dense, and it's about sort of collaborative endeavour, really. And
I suppose one of the things about hand drawings, if there's any replication, it was hard work rather than just the cut and paste of the digital world. Jason, in your office, obviously Ken still does a lot of hand drawing. What's the mix of how people work?
Yeah, I mean, we use, as you'd imagine, there's a lot of hybrid work going on, and there's also the sense that everything kind of needs to move now. So everybody, for whatever reason, is trying to bring some element of animation into a sketch. So, there's lots of different tools you can use to animate sketches. And that could go from diagram to sort of freehand animation. So there's this sense that everything needs to kind of jiggle or move at the moment. So we're sort of moving towards this animated content, which is quite fun. Okay,
the next one, a very different kettle of fish. This is by Ben Johnson, who's been exhibited at the Somme before for entrance to this competition. And this actually is taken from a Foster and Partners drawing, originally, I think, generated by Narinda. So we had a conversation about whether there was a conflict of interest. And we decided there wasn't, because, as he pointed out, what had been done to his original drawing was so particular and details, and in a way transformative. It's a drawing from a project for Mexico Airport. And Ben describes it through a long process of refining a viewpoint and elimination of unnecessary details. I sought to present an image that is timeless and floats between earth and sky, all leading to a still point. Contemplation through drawing, and it's ink on paper. Ben, we had quite a long discussion about this, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. I mean, I think it's interesting that it's, and I'm not quite sure why he did this, but the way it's reflected, and it seems to resemble the iris of an eye. So, and it sort of collapses the kind of macro and micro and the sort of distance and proximity in one tableau.
Yeah, it's like a sort of geometric expanse. It's a kind of all-seeing eye with a macro and micro in and out of. It's quite elaborate.
The thing about this sort of drawing, I mean, it's not everybody's cup of tea, but I think one thing we all agreed with is the extraordinary amount of detailed work that had gone into this. I mean, obsessive, I think, would be the appropriate word for actually contemplating doing something like this. And it's a sort of, well, Jason, do you like it?
Yeah, I do like it. I mean, it is staggering. I mean, you probably can't see it from back there, but it kind of relies on, there's a few layers there, so it relies on one thing overlaying another. Otherwise, it's just a mess of lines. And so, it is unbelievable in terms of its execution.
Thank you very much. Okay, another student, I'm taking it, Dustin Wheat from the University of Texas at Arlington. And this is a homage to Corb. And by the way, you've probably seen it, but if you haven't, there are 150 models of Corb buildings produced by Rennie Tan's practice in Singapore that they've brought over. It's its first excursion of the exhibition to Europe, actually. So this is what Dustin Wheat has to say. Texas meets Ferminy. The vision of this drawing came to me while Charles Edward and I were exploring mushrooms. The following morning, the new me sketched out the composition and rendered it over the following week. And it's drawn with graphite and ink. And it's a rather, it's rather extraordinary up view, a drawing that Corb certainly wouldn't ever have contemplated, let alone delivered. Nikki?
Yeah, I think it's a very strange juxtaposition. You've got this heavy concrete funnel-like structure above, and then you've got this kind of incredible dense forest of bamboo. It appears to be bamboo beneath it, holding up this, monolithic kind of funnel-like shape. So there's a kind of mixture of these kind of materials, which almost contradict each other because, bamboo is such a sustainable material, and yet it's holding up, concrete,
Yeah, we did think hallucinogens may have been involved in this.
Well, you mentioned the mushrooms, so...
Exactly. Jason, up views, once fashionable in architectural drawing, you don't see them so much these days.
No, the worm's eye's definitely gone out of fashion, hasn't it? But yeah, it's not quite a worm's eye, but it's it's a floating sort of piece of concrete, really, isn't it? Just about to sort of lift off. Feels like, it's going to take off. But again, it's a bit like Ben Johnson's. It feels like if that was, your aim, you might have not have wanted to do it by hand and maybe taken a shortcut. But maybe it's better to take the long road on this one because that's what you get.
I think the pencil technique in it is actually very sympathetic to the subject because it's in the actual drawing it conveys the material of the concrete very beautifully, the texture of it and this kind of surface, the soft surface of it, and also the bamboo is very effectively conveyed as well.
Let's move on to the winner of this category, which is Wai Cheng Ye from South China University of Technology, The Spirit of Mountain. Wai Cheng says, this painting uses modern architecture to translate Fan Quan's journey through mountains and streams in the Song dynasty. It is drawn by simple pencils and conveys a joyful spirit of landscape, inheriting the ancient literateur's concept of nature. I try to further reshape the relationship between man-made and nature by reconstructing the relationship between mountains, water, buildings, and plants. It was put to us that because we look at these things anonymously and we only find out who it is afterwards, it was put to us, well, you do realize that if this is not by a Chinese entrant, you're going to have a problem because you're going to get an argument about cultural appropriation. To which I said, well, all right, let's have an argument about cultural appropriation. But happily, and there was a clue in the written text because there were Chinese characters. So it turned out we're not going to have that discussion because obviously it is a Chinese entry. I think one of the things we liked about this was a time when people are putting plants and trees all over everything. This was a rather spare example of that. They're rather sort of intermittently placed, and there's plenty of building rather than making the whole thing a sort of giant growth. Nikki? Or is it Ben? Ben?
Yeah.
No, I'd just say it's very... it employs the tradition of scroll painting very effectively to juxtapose, these hard and soft landscape elements, but in a kind of almost, using a kind of almost brutalist architecture where normally you might find a mountain peak or a cliff face or something. So it's a very clever update of that tradition.
I think the greening aspect of these plants creeping out of this sheer facade is something that we want to put into the city now. We're if you look at buildings, we want greening. We want nature to be coming out at us.
Again, the pencil technique of the actual drawing is very sensitive in the way it's used to convey this story. It's very, very effective.
Jason,
Yeah,
greenery in buildings and the difficulty of conveying what it's going to look like, or do you just go to CGI renders and make it real?
It is so tempting, isn't it? In all our representations to overpopulate, because it's so easy to draw and kind of so hard to achieve. But I think, in this one, it's sort of finely balanced between the man-made and the natural world, and I feel like the natural world in this sort of drawing is gonna win. And it almost feels like it's a story about decay, and the green world is about to win in this, but it feels kind of finely balanced. So I think it's nice.
There's a very interesting comment by an Amsterdam urbanist this morning about to get planning permission for any significant building there. Their beauty committee goes through a checklist of 30 things which are to do with kind of environmental and energy standards. If you don't tick the 30 boxes, you ain't going to get planning permission. And one of the effects of that is increasing the amount of greenery that's put into the buildings. It's reducing windows and fenestration. So that idea in this drawing struck me. Not much glass in that facade. And of course, Ken Shuttleworth notoriously sort of flew a flag for not buildings without any fenestration, but actually claiming that the amount of fenestration was, from an energy point of view, was pretty ruinous. I shouldn't say this next to the Ace-Tech stand, which is all about glass. But anyway, there we are. So that notion of a facade which has very little fenestration is far from being unreal. Well, that's where we got to with our review of these drawings, and these will all be on display in the Soane Museum actually for 6 months next year, starting in early February. And we'll get the overall. We'll be announcing the overall winner at that stage and getting them over to for the exhibition. So I thought it would be interesting just for the rest of this session, perhaps to have some more general discussion about the nature of architectural drawing and how it might differ from the sort of drawings that Ben, you and Nikki do. Do you have observations about? Can you sort of tell straight away? That's an architectural drawing.
Not really. I mean, one of the things that I think we feel is that drawings are much more successful when they are they're able to combine a story and observations about life or a subject, rather than just being purely descriptive of an architectural situation. And so I think that's, that can be one difference. But I think actually architectural drawing has become increasingly narrative of this kind of social and cultural context of architecture anyway. So that distinction is diminishing all the time.
Because I think over the years, for example, in the first or second year, there was extraordinary. It was a sort of AXO of a social housing scheme with all the people populating it. There weren't so many people in the drawings this year. I mean, the Dumpling Institute, you get the odd hand, but there wasn't much attempt to show people, it seemed to me. Nikki, I think that's fair.
Yeah, I think that's true. But like Ben, I'm sort of drawn to narrative, to content. And so architecture sometimes lacks, the architectural drawing sometimes lacks some of that content. So that's why I particularly like the dumpling drawing, because I think it's so rich in content and combines the plan and the aerial view and the conviviality of sharing something and communicating and exchange.
And we have had, a couple of years ago, we gave an award to, it was a sort of tapestry, wasn't it?
Yes.
Which included a little, it was more of a site plan than a master plan for a village in, was it Bangladesh?
Bangladesh.
In Bangladesh. And the debate that year was, well, actually, is this piece of woven material, is this a drawing? Luckily, we were able to consult the head of architecture at the Soane Museum, who's on the jury that year, who pondered this subject and declared that indeed it was. So it got its award. And that kind of was a very interesting kind of hybrid use of materials. That didn't have people in it, but it did have the notion of exactly what that place was going to be like. And Jason, do you, if you're doing competition entries or something like that, do you consciously try and do what you were talking about earlier, which is to have drawings which try to trace a journey or an attitude and run through some sort of almost a diagrammatic process? Is there a formula, in other words, or are they treated differently?
I think we definitely want to be persuasive. So we want to kind of bring you in and take you with us as a client or an audience. But I think attention spans are diminishing. So it's a shame, because I think as architects, we might have been through, quite a long road to get to a point, but the audience maybe doesn't really have that, don't want to commit. So what we end up with, if we're not careful, is this render beauty parade, or where we have to cut to the chase in order to kind of grab our client and get our moment of attention. So that's why these drawings, which tell a bit more of a story and lead you through, are rich and a bit more engaging. So I think the thing that we're fighting against really is to hold your attention and take you with us, rather than here it is.
Well, it's an interesting thing, because you often see, let's say, a design statement document for a planning application where, you get verified views. You get these kind of perfect images of exactly what it's going to look like. And then you see an architectural sketch or drawing, which immediately comes to life. Because there's an odd thing about this, isn't there? As opposed to drawings that artists produce, they are what they are. Architectural drawings, if they're describing the way a building should be or a site should be laid out, or what it's going to look like, of course, are nothing of the sort. I mean, it's why, as Jeremy Melvin said last night, the thing about an architecture exhibition, in a way, it's a fiction, because you can't have an exhibition where the actual buildings are in the exhibition. You have to have a version of them. In the same way that drawings in planning applications are absolute fictions. They're two-dimensional scale reductions of something which actually only at a very surface level is going to look like that in real life, because you can't make any distinction between foreground and background and life and smell and noise and weather conditions and lighting, etc., etc., etc. And it's a curious thing. So I like this sort of drawing. It's architectural drawings that are supposed to be real and actually accurate that I find almost not objectionable. I just find them phony.
Well, I mean, sometimes I think one marvels at the beauty and the construction of purely architectural drawings. I mean, there are many examples of that. But I agree. I think that's a problem for exhibitions about architecture, is that you can't. It's very hard to really convey the experience that architecture can give. So it's always very, very mediated, and that's a difficult thing to overcome. Going back to the story about the site plan of the village in Bangladesh, it was interesting that it was made by a group of women, and the materiality of the drawing was so strong, partly because the group had invested so much in working together. They were from this place, and that kind of emotional engagement and commitment came through in the drawing very, very powerfully, I thought. But
I think it's exciting when you branch out with new materials as well in the drawing. The drawing doesn't have to be restricted to paper or, a certain, the fact that this was an embroidered work that was done, in a community, and everyone was contributing to the whole was rather exciting, actually.
Yeah. Jason, what role would you say drawing plays in your office? Is it the inevitable background to everything? Does it get permeated? Do you when you do your annual volume, what we've done for the last 12 months, does drawing play a big part in that? Do you have a prize in the office for stuff, or is it just so ubiquitous that you don't really worry about it?
We don't really have a prize, but it is interesting. Whenever we're looking to bring in new clients, or we're showing them around the studio, it's always the hand drawings that they will just linger on or look over a shoulder. So we sort of deliberately now will try and showcase that, and I think it's because they just feel like they're getting under the skin or having a sneak preview, or it's just that immediacy that really seemingly only a hand drawing can it just kind of grabs you. So it is definitely the means that we try and talk to each other with, that we talk to our clients with, just because of that that immediacy. And so it's part of the language, really, in terms of dialogue, and it really should be. It's a conversational kind of tool to move a project forward. But it's funny how on a project there'll always be one drawing that you kind of keep coming back to that somehow captures the spirit of what you're trying to do, and you might stumble on it by accident.
Well, I think from that point of view, it's interesting. We always ask architects entering the awards when they send their material in, electronically, of course, to send us the hero image. There's a bit of masculine stuff for you. Why is it hero? Anyway, it's the one. And of course, it's almost inevitable. Well, it's always a photograph. And the distinction between photography and drawing, architectural photography and drawing, I think is a very, very interesting one, because good architectural photography, I think, is a real art form, and it's not recording. Generally speaking, it's not recording there. It's actually saying something about the nature of the thing itself. Well, I'd like to thank Langlands and Bell, Ben Langlands and Nikki Bell, and Jason Parker for taking part in this session. Thank you, audience.